The kitchen was warm with late afternoon light, filtered through the gingham curtains my mother had hung over the window years ago. The scent of sautéed garlic clung to the air, mixed with the faint citrus of the cleaning spray still lingering on the countertops. My father sat at the head of the table, sifting through the week's grocery coupons. My mother was adjusting a list on her phone, mumbling about how many guests Sophrona's bridal shower would bring. I stood at the corner of the room, gripping the letter with both hands. My fingers trembled. My heart thudded so loudly in my chest, I thought it might drown out my words. But I'd rehearsed this moment, over and over again in my head. Quoting Michelle Obama's line about how education opens doors, I'd even practiced how I'd smile while saying it. Still, my voice cracked. I got into Harvard, I said, my breath catching. Full academic honors, valedictorian status. My father's coupon clipping paused. My mother looked up just long enough to blink. For a second, everything went still. Then, my father set the scissors down and, without looking at me, muttered, "We're not made of money." Just like that, the moment collapsed. I waited, eyes fixed on them, expecting something more. A laugh, maybe. A pause to say he was joking. But he wasn't. My mother didn't even blink. She just nodded slightly. "Well, we'll look into some community college options. Something local. Maybe there's a decent program nearby." A silence washed over me like cold water. I opened my mouth, trying to explain. "They're offering financial aid, almost full tuition. I'll cover the rest with work study and scholarships." My dad waved his hand. "Sophrona went to nursing school in state and didn't rack up a penny of debt. She didn't need Ivy League nonsense to get her life together." Sophrona. Always the benchmark. "They didn't say, 'Congratulations,'" I whispered inside my head. "They said, 'That's inconvenient.'" I swallowed the lump in my throat. My entire high school life, the late-night study sessions, honor roll awards, state debate wins, all of it, compressed into that envelope I still held. And they reduced it to budget math. That evening, we had roast chicken. It was a Friday ritual. Mashed potatoes with too much butter and green beans boiled to dullness. The kitchen buzzed with small talk. Soft jazz played low from the Bluetooth speaker near the fridge. Everything looked the same, felt the same. Except me. I wore my navy blue school cord over my sweater. I thought it was subtle. I thought it might invite a question, just one. But the conversation never drifted to me. They talked about Sophrona's florist and how she might go with peonies instead of roses. They debated whether they should replace the living room couch before the guests came in July. Dad mentioned the cost of gas climbing again, and Mom said maybe it was time to buy a Costco membership. I chewed quietly, my fork scraping against the plate louder than I liked. My hands were folded in my lap when I wasn't using them. I kept glancing up, hoping, foolishly, that someone would shift gears. But no one looked my way, not even once. It was as if Harvard had never happened, I told myself. As if I was sitting here invisible. That silence didn't just sting, it erased. After dinner, I lingered while Mom loaded the dishwasher. The kitchen faucet hissed. I leaned against the counter. Maybe it hasn't sunk in yet, I told myself. Maybe they're overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't about Harvard. It wasn't about finances. It was about value. I thought of all those nights I skipped outings to finish essays. I remembered working weekends at the public library downtown, filing dusty bookshelves to save money for application fees. I remembered the teacher who told me I had Ivy League potential, and the counselor who called me relentless in the best way. None of that seemed to count here. As a kid, I was told, be helpful, not exceptional. I kept thinking if I played by the rules, they'd eventually change the game. I thought if I made myself undeniable, I whispered inside my head, they would finally see me. Instead, I'd become a ghost, not for failing, but for succeeding in a way they didn't value. Later that night, I cleared the dining table after everyone had gone to bed. The house had fallen into its typical hush, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of old wood in the hallway. I stood still for a moment, staring at the centerpiece, a bowl of plastic fruit we hadn't changed in years. Then I reached into my folder, pulled out the Harvard letter, and laid it flat in the center of the table. A symbol. Not for them. For me. The next morning, I came down early. Mom was already in the kitchen. She picked up the letter, scanned it briefly, folded it, and set it aside. Not a word. Sophrona wandered in, yawning. She looked at me, then at Mom, then asked, "Should we go with ivory or blush for the bridesmaid dresses?" I didn't answer. I took my plate from the drying rack, poured myself some coffee, and sat silently at the breakfast nook. The letter remained untouched on the side counter. I didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the morning, not out of spite, but out of something far clearer than anger. That night, I realized silence wasn't just absence. It was a tool, a weapon, and it had been used on me skillfully for years. Now, I knew what it looked like, what it felt like, and I would never let it consume me again. It had only been 2 days since I placed the Harvard letter on the dining table, hoping for recognition that never came. I kept waiting for someone to circle back to it, as if perhaps they needed time to digest the news. But by Sunday, during our usual family brunch, it was clear. Harvard wasn't just a non-priority, it was a non-topic. The dining room smelled like maple syrup and warm biscuits. Sophrona was chatting with Mom about floral arrangements for her bridal shower. Dad sat with his phone, half listening, nodding occasionally while scrolling through his fantasy football app. I sat at the same table, barely acknowledged, stirring creamer into lukewarm coffee I didn't really want. Mom was rambling about whether to go with rose gold or ivory for the table centerpieces. "And do you think Michael's mother will want to sit with the bridesmaids, or should we keep the parents at their own table?" she asked Sophrona. "I think she'll want the attention," Sophrona replied, laughing. I glanced at the wall behind them. Sometime between Friday and now, my mother had updated the family photo collage. There were 2 new framed pictures, both of Sophrona and her fiancé, posed at the beach, smiling like they had never known an ounce of conflict in their lives. Not a single photo of me, not even the one from my high school debate team win. The gap on the wall wasn't accidental. It was curated. Still, I waited, holding back the urge to scream. Just one question, that's all I needed. One voice to say, "So, what's next with Harvard?" But it never came. I remembered something Maya Angelou once said. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." This wasn't the first time. It was just the time I finally believed them. That afternoon, I went upstairs to fold laundry. As I set the basket down on my bed, I noticed a pamphlet placed neatly on top of my pillow. Sacramento Valley Community College. No note, no comment, no explanation, just left there like an obvious, unspoken suggestion, the kind of suggestion you weren't supposed to question. I held it up, examining the cheap, glossy paper, filled with smiling students and a list of 2-year programs. I stared at it for a long time before walking downstairs with it in hand. My mother was at the sink, rinsing out the coffee pot. "Did you put this on my bed?" I asked, holding the brochure between 2 fingers. She didn't look up. "We thought it might be more realistic." "Realistic? You don't want to be drowning in debt at your age, Ayala. It's just an option. Something local, sensible. Not everything has to be about prestige." I breathed in slowly through my nose. "I have financial aid. Harvard's already covering most of it." She finally turned, drying her hands with a dish towel. "Still, it's a long way. And expensive. And you know we're planning a wedding. There's only so much money to go around." The message was clear. I was a financial inconvenience. Inside, something cold and firm settled into place. This wasn't just practicality. It was erasure dressed up as logic. They weren't helping me find a way. They were giving me a way out of their responsibility. Later that evening, we sat down to dinner. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans again. Classic, familiar. Comfort food that suddenly tasted like silence. I didn't bring up the letter again. I was done trying to convince anyone I belonged anywhere. But my father, sipping iced tea, looked over at Sophrona and said, "You made the smart choice. Local nursing school, affordable tuition, steady job right out of graduation. Solid move." She smiled, modestly. Didn't look at me once. I bit the inside of my cheek. I remembered the nights I stayed up until 2 doing SAT prep, or the weekends I worked at the library shelving books, just so I could afford college applications. The time I helped mom with her taxes even while studying for finals. All of that, apparently, not as smart. Harvard's mostly paid for, I said quietly. Dad waved me off. Yeah, but it's not just about tuition. It's about being practical. You don't build a life on a fancy name. Sophrona understood that. There's a difference between being supported and simply being tolerated, I said. But only in my head. Saying it aloud would have led nowhere. I started calculating, literally, in my mind, adding things up. They paid for Sophrona's nursing school, bought her a used car after graduation, fully funded her wedding planning, including the dress, catering deposits, and venue down payment. She was 25 and already financially covered like royalty. Me? I paid for my AP exams out of pocket. Rode the city bus for 3 years to get to school. Worked nearly every weekend during senior year. All the hours, all the effort, mine. I wasn't being punished for failing. I was being overlooked for daring to succeed in a way they didn't understand, or worse, didn't want to understand. I'd once told myself I was the family's hope. Maybe I was just the backup plan in case their favorite daughter fell short. The following weekend, a small gathering was held at our house, a dinner to plan out more wedding details. A few relatives came by. Dad grilled. Mom laid out name cards at the table. Everyone had a seat. Everyone but me. There was no card with my name on it. No spot saved. I ended up in a corner of the table, next to the kitchen pass-through window. When I asked where to sit, my mother said, "Just find a spot. Or actually, can you help us take a group photo? You've got the best eye for pictures." I stood behind the lens, smiling for others, capturing the moment that I had been carefully removed from. I wasn't part of the memory. I was the one documenting it. That night, I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling. A thought settled in deeper than anything had before. I was no longer a guest at my own family's table. I was staff. It started with a receipt, not even one addressed to me, just a stray piece of paper tucked inside a pile of mail left open on the kitchen table. I wasn't snooping. Not really. I was helping Mom clean out the clutter near the toaster oven, and there it was. A payment confirmation from a wedding vendor. Full payment. Sophrona's floral arrangements, settled in one transaction. I stared at it longer than I needed to, the ink from the printer slightly smudged at the edges, but still legible. The amount wasn't outrageous, but it was enough to sting. I hadn't seen a dime offered toward my tuition, housing deposit, or even the laptop I needed to write my senior thesis. But peonies? Those got paid in full. Curiosity drove me further. I pulled open the drawer by the fridge, the one crammed with menus, pens that didn't work, and expired coupons. Buried under a half-used notepad was a slim folder. Inside, old tuition statements from Sophrona's nursing school, paid monthly without fail, car loan documents, again under her name, all covered. No notes of struggle, no, "we'll see how the finances look next month," just proof that when they wanted to make something happen, they made it happen. It wasn't about the money. That much became painfully clear. It was about belief, about investment, about who they thought deserved to be lifted and who they expected to carry the weight alone. The second blow came a week later. While updating my FAFSA for Harvard, I ran into a snag, an error tied to my social security number. Confused, I reached out to Connor, my manager at the bookstore where I worked weekends. He'd helped me file taxes once before and knew his way around systems most people didn't. "Something's been filed already under your number," he said, squinting at the screen. I furrowed my brow. "That's not possible. I haven't filed anything yet." He tapped a few keys. "Oh, looks like an education savings account. Claimed, used, but not by you." I blinked. "Used for what?" Connor hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. The account had been opened in my name, but the beneficiary was Sophrona. The disbursement went directly to the college's billing office. The timeline matched her final year of school. I didn't know what to say. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mouth dry, my hands suddenly too cold for summer. My parents had used my name, my credentials, to move money. Not just that, they claimed me on their taxes to get deductions, all while I was scraping together application fees and skipping lunch to afford bus rides. They'd used me. In that moment, I wasn't a daughter. I was a loophole. I didn't confront them, not immediately. There wasn't rage, not yet. Just a quiet, growing storm that settled behind my ribs and waited. That night, I started a list. Not for anyone else. Just for me. SAT prep books, $142.75. 2 out-of-state debate competitions, $687 total, not counting the meals I skipped to save for gas. Laptop, refurbished, still cost me $460 Harvard application fee, $75. Waived only after I submitted 3 rounds of documentation application fees for the other 6 schools I never intended to go to. $420. Every inch of my journey was built with after-school tutoring hours, birthday money I didn't spend, and nights I didn't sleep. And they acted like none of it happened, like all of it was invisible. There's no such thing as overreacting when someone erases your contributions. I wrote that sentence across the top of my journal. Then I listed everything they'd said I never needed help with. Each item, each moment, inked down as evidence not of bitterness, but of truth. I wasn't angry they hadn't handed me the world. I was angry they pretended I hadn't built one on my own. The irony came back full circle over dinner, as it always did. Dad leaned back in his chair, his plate half empty. Don't be foolish with money, Ayala. Start small, smart, practical. Mom chimed in without lifting her eyes from her phone. You don't want to spend your whole life trying to impress people with some Ivy League label. That's not security. I chewed slowly, keeping my expression neutral. It took everything in me not to laugh. Dark, bitter laughter that wouldn't have stopped if it started. The same people who'd stolen my identity to fund a life they deemed worthy were lecturing me on financial humility. The same mouths that said, "Don't reach too high," had no problem standing on my shoulders to lift someone else higher. I nodded, folded my napkin neatly, and excused myself from the table. Later, once they were asleep, I went to the small cabinet near the laundry room, the one where we kept old files. I rifled through folders until I found the tax documents from last year. I'd helped Mom alphabetize them once upon a time. And there it was, clear as day. They had claimed me as a dependent. Again, full deduction. Despite contributing nothing to my tuition, my rent, or even my groceries. Despite the fact I'd stopped asking them for anything since junior year of high school. Even when I was invisible, I was profitable. I closed the folder gently, returned everything where I found it, and walked back to my room. I didn't cry. That night, I didn't feel broken. I felt sharpened. If they could use me like a resource, I would stop being available. The kitchen was quiet when I walked in. The light filtering through the window had turned golden, painting long shadows across the floor. The house smelled faintly of brewed coffee, though no one had made a fresh pot in hours. I reached for a glass of water, then paused when I saw it. My Harvard acceptance package sat on the edge of the trash bin, not torn, but crumpled, creased as if someone had balled it up and then smoothed it out again. A brown ring of dried coffee stained the corner. Pinned to it with a magnet was a small sticky note, written in my mother's meticulous cursive. Don't let this get to your head. I stood there, the glass forgotten in my hand. It wasn't the placement in the trash that gutted me. It was the note. How intentional it was. Not a scribble, not a joke. It was deliberate, written slowly, carefully. That took time. That took forethought and malice. I didn't say anything. Not then. I didn't march into the living room and demand an apology. I didn't rip the note into pieces or slam doors. I just picked up the package, smoothed it again, and walked quietly back to my room. That week at school, I kept my head down. I smiled at the right times, participated when called on, but inside, something shifted. I didn't feel proud. I felt raw, exposed. The very thing that should have been my victory had become a mark of shame inside my own home. During homeroom on Thursday, the counselor called my name. Ayala, congratulations again on Harvard. That's no small feat. Some students clapped. I gave a polite nod, cheeks burning. I hadn't told anyone at school that I hadn't been allowed to celebrate, that the letter had gone from mail to trash in 24 hours. Then James, a kid I barely spoke to outside of group projects, turned in his seat and asked, "Your family must be so proud, huh?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Before I could fake a response, Delaney, always bold, always sharp, said, "They should be." But not all families value the right things. The room went still. My eyes met hers for a second, and for once, I didn't feel alone. She didn't say it to be dramatic. She said it like a fact, like something obvious, and just like that, the shame shifted, became something else, not gone, but no longer mine to carry alone. The next morning, Mom was waiting for me in the kitchen. She didn't ask how school was. She didn't ask about the counselor's praise or James's comment or even Delaney's brutal honesty. She just said, "Are you spreading lies about us now?" I blinked. "What?" "Sophrona heard from one of her friends that some girl in your class made a scene, that she said we didn't support you." I set my bag down slowly. "I didn't say anything. Someone else did." Her arms folded. "You need to watch what kind of message you're putting out there. We've done everything we can for you." That was when Dad walked in, tie slightly crooked, holding his coffee. "You're embarrassing this family," he said. "Is that what you want? Attention? To be the girl whose parents didn't clap loud enough?" I looked between them, calm, cold. "You tossed my letter," I said. No response. "You used my name to file accounts. You told me I was too expensive." Mom flinched slightly. "We're protecting you from making a mistake." "No," I said. "You're protecting your narrative." It was the first time I said it aloud. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something akin to peace. Later, in my room, I took out the acceptance letter again, the one I'd rescued from the bin. It was wrinkled now, the coffee stain even darker after drying. The sticky note still clung to it like residue from a wound that wouldn't close. "We love you, but don't be dramatic. We support you, just not like that." I'd heard those lines 100 times over the years, always with a smile, always wrapped in sugar. It wasn't hate, but it wasn't love either. Not the kind that saw you, not the kind that cheered even when it didn't understand. I sat on my bed, holding the letter in one hand and the sticky note in the other. I stared at that line. "Don't let this get to your head." The ink was smudged in one corner. My mother's elegant loops and soft threats. I picked up a pen and wrote on the back of it, "This doesn't make me arrogant. It makes me enough." Then I tacked it to the wall above my bed. Not for them. For me. And I knew, next time they brought up Harvard, I wouldn't ask for approval, I wouldn't explain, I would declare. I heard her voice from the hallway before I even turned the corner. My mother's tone was clipped, businesslike, polite enough for a stranger, cold enough to chill the walls. I paused just outside the kitchen, holding my laundry basket, suddenly aware of how still the rest of the house had become. "Yes, we've seen the letter," she was saying. "But we're not interested. It's not financially realistic for our family." My stomach dropped. There was a pause, probably the Harvard representative on the other end trying to process the refusal. My mother didn't wait for a response. "She's considering local options," she added, then hung up. By the time I walked into the room, she was already stirring her tea like nothing had happened. I set the basket down a little too hard. "You didn't tell me Harvard called." She didn't look up. "I handled it." "You handled it," I repeated, my voice thin. She took a sip, then finally met my eyes. "You should be thanking us. We saved you from a mountain of debt and disappointment. You don't want to start life with regrets." "You didn't save me from anything," I said, pulse rising. "You stole the decision from me." She sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "We've given you stability. It's time you started being grateful." There it was, the word they loved to use when they wanted me quiet, grateful. As if being born into a house where my name only mattered on tax forms was a favor I should never question. That weekend, we had a barbecue in the backyard. Dad's idea. Casual, upbeat, loud with the clatter of folding chairs and aluminum pans covered in foil. Relatives gathered in clusters, uncles laughing about football, aunts comparing dresses for Sophrona's shower. It was sunny and breezy, the kind of afternoon that would have felt lighthearted under different circumstances. Someone asked the inevitable question, "So, Ayala, where to for college?" Before I could answer, my father chuckled. She's still dreaming big. I spoke before I could talk myself out of it. I got into Harvard, full academic honors, and I'm going. The conversation halted. Even the kids playing with the cornhole boards went quiet for a beat. There were a few awkward smiles. A cousin raised her eyebrows like I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. My dad let out a dismissive breath through his nose. She's being dramatic again. I smiled politely. I'm being clear. He opened his mouth to say more, but I cut him off. I won't let your fear define my future. If you need to shrink the world to make yourselves comfortable, that's your business, but I'm not going to live small just to keep this family from feeling insecure. That was when Aunt Rochelle spoke up, soft but steady. Good for you, honey. About time someone did something different. I heard someone else mutter, well, she always was the odd one. I didn't flinch. That night, my father found me in the garage, folding up the last few trays from the party. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You really think this is worth all the fuss? I do. Sophrona made safe choices. She stayed grounded. That's what we admire. I turned slowly to face him. So you'd rather I dim myself than try to shine? He didn't answer. You said we're not made of money, I continued. But you had enough for her tuition, her car, her wedding. You had enough to send flowers to 10 different relatives when she got engaged. You just didn't want to spend any of it on me. We can't throw money into a fantasy, he replied. It's not fantasy. It's fact. I got in. I earned it. You just can't stomach the fact that it was me. He clenched his jaw, but I didn't stop. I'll take on more hours. I'll find extra scholarships. I'll sleep on a twin mattress in a room the size of a closet if I have to. I'll get there without you. But you won't get to say you supported me, not after this. He left without saying another word. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't fume. I made moves. I applied for a housing grant through Harvard's First Generation Initiative. I revised my FAFSA and added a short statement explaining my unique family situation. I dug into forums and alumni blogs, finding the cheapest meal plans, the best side jobs near campus. While the rest of the house slept, I sat at my desk in the dark, lit only by the glow of my laptop and the quiet clarity of my own determination. I opened my journal and wrote, I used to think love meant support, but now I know. Love without respect is just control in nicer packaging. I closed the book, folded the sticky note Mom had written, Don't let this get to your head, and tucked it in the back pocket of my suitcase. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen while my mother buttered toast. If you can't stand behind me, I said, my voice steady, at least don't stand in my way. She didn't reply. She sliced her toast, carefully, as if nothing had been said. My father walked in, glanced at us, and kept moving past without a word. I pinned the Harvard acceptance letter to the fridge. At the bottom, I'd written, in blue pen, confirmed. Then I turned, picked up my coffee, and walked out, shoulders square, steps light. Sunday morning came quietly, with no particular weather, no unexpected news, just the familiar rhythm of my grandmother's house. The gentle ticking of her mantel clock, the faint clink of china cups, and the unmistakable scent of her peppermint tea. Honora had invited me over like she always did, with a warmth that never required RSVP. Her house had always felt like an island in the storm. Even now, with her hands wrinkled and her back slightly hunched, she exuded a steadiness I hadn't found in anyone else. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, wrapping both hands around my mug, pretending the warmth was enough to melt what had hardened in me. You're quiet today, she said gently, her eyes fixed on mine like she already knew the answer. I shrugged, smiling just enough to avoid tears. Just a long week, she nodded slowly. Are they making it hard on you again? I didn't answer right away. My silence was enough. She set down her cup, reached for a small sewing basket on the sideboard, and rummaged through until her fingers closed around a faded white envelope. She held it out to me with both hands. It's not much, she said, but I've been saving it since I retired. For something that mattered. And you matter. I opened the envelope to find a modest stash of bills, more than I expected, probably a few $100s. It wasn't a solution, but it was momentum. She smiled when I looked up, then added, "Sometimes we wait for permission from the very people we need to walk away from." I didn't trust my voice enough to speak, so I just nodded. That night, I spread out everything I had on the floor of my bedroom. The Harvard letter, my FAFSA forms, the envelope from Grandma, and a printout map of Cambridge. The soft hum of the box fan in my window filled the silence while I sorted through documents with steady hands. There were no tears. I'd cried enough. This wasn't defiance. It was logistics. I filled out the final acceptance form, sealed the envelope, and placed it beside my pillow like a security blanket. I typed out a to-do list. Rent options, meal plan modifications, textbook buybacks. It wasn't rebellion. It was survival. "I'm not abandoning them," I whispered aloud. "I'm reclaiming myself." I looked at the sticky note I had taken from the fridge a few days ago, the one that read, "Don't let this get to your head." I flipped it over and wrote in all caps, "This isn't ego. This is enough." I pinned it above my bed, next to the map. The next morning, the house was loud again. The clatter of pans, the scent of bacon, the same tired jokes about how Dad could never get the eggs quite right. It all sounded normal, like nothing had shifted, like my life wasn't hanging in the balance. I walked past the kitchen on my way to the stairs and paused just long enough to hear my mother laugh. "At least Sophrona isn't out there chasing silly dreams," she said. I didn't flinch. I just kept walking. Upstairs, I grabbed my small suitcase, the one I usually saved for weekend trips, and began to pack a few essentials, clothes, my journal, the Harvard letter, now tucked inside a manila folder. I walked down slowly, letting my steps feel final. At the fridge, I took a clean sticky note and wrote, "I'm not asking you to believe in me anymore. I believe in myself enough for the both of us." I stuck it beside the chore calendar. Then I turned toward the living room and took one last look at the family portrait above the mantel. Sophrona was dead center, of course. Everyone else clustered around her like she was the sun. I was off to the left, cropped slightly by the frame. Fitting. No one saw me leave. No one asked where I was going. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out. Outside, the air was crisp and dry, the sky a shade of blue that felt both new and old. I called a rideshare and sat in silence as the car wound through familiar streets. The driver didn't ask questions. I was thankful for that. He dropped me at the Greyhound station downtown. I stepped out, nodded, and walked into the terminal with nothing more than my suitcase and that folder. The station was mostly empty. I found a bench near the far wall and sat, hands folded in my lap, pulse steady. I looked around, not for anyone I knew, but out of habit. For years, I'd trained myself to seek approval, to scan for expressions that might give me permission. But there was no one here to grant it. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt light. I always thought I had to earn my place at the table, I thought. Turns out, I needed to build a table where I wasn't a guest. The bus pulled in. I stood, boarded, and found a window seat. The engine hummed to life. As Sacramento blurred outside the window, I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera. I took a photo of the Harvard letter folded neatly on my lap. Then I posted it with one line. "Sometimes you leave quietly, but your absence echoes louder than any scream." No filter, no hashtags, no location tag, just the truth. The envelope came in the mail 3 days before the senior honors banquet. My name was printed in gold at the top, above the words Valedictorian Banquet Invitation. It was elegant, formal, everything I'd worked for. I ran my fingers over the paper, imagining the look on their faces when I told them. That morning at breakfast, I placed the envelope next to my cereal bowl. My mother didn't glance at it. My father kept scrolling through his phone. "I got the official invitation," I said. "The banquet's Friday night. They're announcing me as valedictorian." My mother sipped her coffee, then finally looked up. "Friday? That's Sophrona's bridal shower. We already booked the venue." I blinked. "I told you the banquet was coming." She waved her hand as if I'd said something foolish. "Sweetheart, we can't be in 2 places at once. Sophrona's guests are flying in from out of state. You'll understand once you're engaged." My father didn't even look up. "That honor stuff can wait. Marriage is real life." I said nothing, just sat there, staring at the steam rising from my cereal. It wasn't the date that hurt. It was what the date represented, what they were willing to miss. That afternoon, I took the city bus to the consignment store and picked up a pair of modest but beautiful shoes, ivory satin, low heel, tasteful, just enough sparkle to feel special. I paid in cash for my tutoring gig and carried them home like a prize. But 2 days later, the box was gone. I came home from school and searched my closet, under the bed, the coat rack. Nothing. Then I saw the note on the fridge in Mom's handwriting. Shoes returned, receipt in drawer. I opened the drawer. There it was, the receipt and the cash, minus a few dollars, which had probably gone toward groceries. They were just shoes, I whispered as I confronted her in the kitchen. She barely looked up from the sink. You won't need them now. We can't afford indulgences. My throat tightened. They weren't indulgent, they were mine. She dried her hands on a dish towel. You've got other flats. No one's looking at your feet anyway. That moment split something in me that had only been cracking until then. This wasn't about money. It was about message, about control. It wasn't just about shoes. It was about telling me I didn't deserve to feel special. I didn't cry. I walked upstairs, closed my door, and sat on my bed in silence. Friday came, the day of the banquet, the day of the shower. I dressed myself without commentary, pinned my honor cords carefully across my chest, and took a rideshare to the venue. My name was printed in the program. I was listed third to speak. The hall was filled with proud parents, bouquets of flowers, and clusters of families posing for pictures. I walked in alone. My seat at the front had a temporary tag. No reserved sign, no family name. I sat and folded my hands in my lap. A classmate leaned over and whispered, "Your parents not coming?" I smiled softly. They had other plans. He nodded slowly, then looked away. When I took the stage, I kept my voice steady. I spoke about persistence, about showing up when no one else does, about staying true to yourself even when others are determined to write a different story for you. Sometimes, I said, you have to clap for yourself when no one else shows up. No standing ovation, just polite applause. But I didn't care. I had already given myself what I needed. Afterward, I took a cab home. I stepped inside quietly, kicked off my flats, and climbed the stairs. I didn't stop in the kitchen. I didn't ask about the shower. I didn't look for validation. I went straight to my room, sat at the edge of the bed, and stared at the blank wall across from me. I thought there would be tears. There weren't. Only a strange, clean quiet. I reached for my phone, opened the photo gallery, and began deleting images, family vacations, birthday dinners, holidays where I smiled through my own invisibility, not out of hatred, just to make space. If they won't clap, I wrote in my journal, I'll build my own audience. The next morning, a package arrived with no return label, small, square, taped neatly. Inside were the shoes I had bought, the same ones, still new, untouched, no note, no explanation, just the shoes. I slid them on. They fit perfectly. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the hem of my dress pants, watching my own reflection settle into itself. They fit better now, I whispered, because now I wear them for me. The lights on the stage were too bright. They always were, but that night, it felt different. I stood at the podium, fingers curled lightly around the edge, the room before me filled with parents, teachers, students, all neatly seated in rows. Some held phones up, recording. Others clapped politely, not knowing what I was about to say would outlast the applause. I took a breath, let it settle in my chest, and looked toward the second row where Delphine sat, her phone tilted up, already capturing every second. I know, I began, that tonight is meant to be a celebration. A few people shifted in their seats. Celebration of effort, of achievement, of support systems that got us here. I paused again. The room quieted. But some of us arrived here not because someone cleared the path, but because we dared to walk it alone. No one laughed. No one gasped. They just listened. I didn't mention names. I didn't throw blame like confetti. But every word was a breadcrumb leading straight to the reality I had carried in silence for years. I've learned, I said, voice firmer now, that pride isn't always something others hand you. Sometimes it's something you wrap around yourself like armor when no one else will lend you warmth. The speech lasted 7 minutes. It was everything I had rehearsed: honest, clear, dignified. And when I walked off the stage, people clapped, maybe louder than I expected. Still, I felt hollow. The crowd dissolved into clusters. Students hugged their families. Flashbulbs popped. Proud parents cried behind cameras. I stood to the side, nodding when someone said, "Congratulations," smiling just enough, waiting for the part where I could leave. Delphine found me near the exit. "You were brilliant," she said. "They're going to feel that." I nodded again, too tired to respond. I just wanted to disappear into the shadows and sleep for days. The next morning, Delphine uploaded the video to her social media with the caption, "This is what courage looks like. She did it alone." I didn't think much of it. I assumed it would float around for a day or two, maybe get a few hundred views among people who cared about local speeches. But by lunch, it had hit 50,000. By dinner, 120,000. By midnight, over 300,000. And Harvard's official page had shared it. I sat in my room at a cheap motel near the station, laptop perched on my knees, watching as the comments rolled in. "This girl needs to be heard. Her family doesn't deserve her. She's what resilience looks like." My hands trembled over the keyboard. Not from fear, from recognition, from finally being seen by people who didn't owe me loyalty but gave it anyway. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. 2 days later, I returned to my parents' house to grab a few boxes I hadn't been able to take during my departure. The car idled out front as I used the spare key to let myself in. The house was quiet, unusually so. I walked through the front hall, past the living room, toward the cabinet where my school awards had once been displayed. My valedictorian trophy was gone. In its place sat a gold-framed engagement photo of Sophrona, perfectly centered, lit softly by the hallway light. They didn't just forget me, they replaced me. I stood in front of that frame for longer than I care to admit, just breathing, processing. My hands clenched into fists, then released again. I turned and opened the storage cabinet beneath the stairs, rifling past extension cords, old holiday decorations, and broken electronics. And there it was, tucked in the back corner, behind a stack of unused placemats. My trophy, dusty but intact. I pulled it out slowly, running a finger along the engraved plaque. The weight of it, literal and symbolic, settled back into my hands like it belonged there all along. On the end table beside the photo, I left a sticky note. "You can keep your golden frame. I'll take the gold I earned." I walked out without slamming the door. That evening, as I sat on a train heading east, my phone buzzed. An email. Subject line: "Orientation opportunity, Harvard leadership team." It was from the faculty dean. "We saw your speech," it read. "We'd love to invite you to speak again at our fall orientation. Your story resonates." I read it 3 times, not because I didn't believe it, but because it was real, and I needed it to be. I replied with one sentence. "This time, I'll speak louder. Not to be heard, but to be remembered." 3 days passed after the video went viral. 3 full days. Not a text, not a call, not even a forwarded link from one of my cousins with a casual, "Saw this." Not from mom, not from dad, not even from Sophrona. The silence for once didn't cut. It exposed, like sunlight flooding a dark corner, showing the mold that had always been there. Then, finally, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Take the video down. People are starting to talk." That was it. Not, "We're proud." Not, "We watched." Not even a question. A demand. I stared at the screen for a long time before my father's message followed. "You've embarrassed us. Delete it." I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. Let them wait the same way I had waited every time I brought home an award they didn't ask about, every time I earned a win they couldn't be bothered to acknowledge. Eventually, I sent one line. "You were never worried when I was being erased." No response, not even a defense. Later that night, I laid in bed, letting the glow from my screen light the room. The views were climbing, 450,000. Comments coming in like a storm surge, strangers validating what my family never did. And yet, all I could think about was the timing. It wasn't their silence that broke me. It was when they finally chose to speak and what they chose to say. 2 days later, I returned home to gather the last of my things from the attic. I didn't knock. I used my key, passed down without ceremony years ago. The house was quiet, dim. The smell of cinnamon from the wax warmers Mom loved lingered, as did the faint tension that never quite left the walls. I walked up the stairs and opened the attic door, the hinges groaning in protest. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just my debate team plaques, some books, a blanket I'd left behind. But then I saw it, a plastic file box labeled College Mail. Curious, I pulled it toward me and flipped open the lid, and there it was. The original Harvard offer letter, still sealed. The postmark read 2 months before I ever received a call. The return envelope had been slit open and resealed. My mother had hidden it, sat on it, delayed it. My chest went cold, not with shock, but confirmation. They weren't just passive in their indifference. They were active, intentional. This was never about protecting me. It was about protecting a story in which Sophrona was the golden child, and I was the unnecessary variable. I took a photo of the envelope, timestamp included, and sent it to myself. I didn't post it, not yet, but I wanted the proof, my own receipt of betrayal. On the way back down, I passed the hallway mirror and caught a glimpse of myself. My expression was unreadable, but I looked older, sharper, less likely to wait for someone else to hand me value. That night, in my apartment back in Cambridge, I made tea and sat by the window. I opened my journal and flipped past the pages I had filled with every lie I had once believed, the pages that still smelled like the living room where truth was always rewritten to fit someone else's comfort. And I remembered. When I cried at school after being teased in 5th grade, my mother hadn't comforted me. She had told me not to make it a scene. When Sophrona failed a math final, it was the teacher's fault. Always, image came first. Now, with me exposed to the world, my speech shared, my story repeated, they weren't panicking over my pain. They were panicking over perception. The next text from Mom said it all. We're getting calls from people. What do you want from us? As if this had been about attention, as if my silence had ever been strategic. They were never afraid of losing me, I wrote in my journal. They were afraid of being seen for who they really were. I drew a thick line under the sentence. That night, I made copies of my Harvard acceptance letter and printed out a screenshot of my speech on the school's official page. I stapled them together, added a note that simply read, "In case you ever try to rewrite this," and dropped it in an envelope addressed to myself. It wasn't about being seen, it was about seeing myself. Forgiveness doesn't always mean re-entry. Sometimes it means release. I didn't need them to let me back in. I just needed to walk out with clarity. A week passed. Then came the voicemail. My phone buzzed while I was sorting laundry. I picked it up, unfamiliar number. I let it ring out. Moments later, the voicemail icon appeared. I played it without headphones, hands still in the basket of unfolded clothes. "I know you're gone," my father's voice said. "Just, remember who paid for your shoes when you were 5. That was it. That was what he clung to. That he once paid for something when I couldn't. As if that transaction sealed a lifetime of silence, as if that receipt canceled out everything they'd stolen since. I deleted the message. Then I turned off my phone. They remembered my feet, I whispered to no one, not the path I walked. And I wasn't 5 anymore. I hadn't planned on staying long. The birthday party was for a cousin I barely knew, but it felt like the right moment to say goodbye without announcing anything. The air in the backyard was warm, full of laughter and folding chairs, paper plates sagging under store-bought sheet cake. Everyone was chatting over each other in that layered family way, crosstalk and small jabs that passed for affection. I was mid-conversation with an aunt when a small tug at my sleeve made me turn. It was the youngest in the family, Tessa, barely 7, all bangs and big eyes. "Why doesn't your mom put your picture up too?" she asked. I blinked. "What do you mean?" She pointed toward the living room window, where the photo collage sat in clear view. There's lots of pictures of Sophrona, like everywhere, but not you. Is Lisa not important, Mom? Her mother, a second cousin of mine, froze. She was mid-sip of her iced tea and now staring into the distance like she hadn't heard anything. Everyone around the table quieted just slightly, that subtle hush adults use to avoid validating something inconvenient. My mom, standing a few feet away, glanced over with a tight smile and turned back to adjusting a napkin stack. She didn't answer the question. It wasn't the silence that hurt this time. It was how practiced it had become. Later that week, I ran into Mrs. Dalton, our elderly neighbor who'd known me since kindergarten. I just stepped out of the post office when she waved me down with a grocery bag in one hand and sunglasses perched crookedly on her nose. "Ayala," she called, her voice always carrying a cheerful rasp. "I saw you online, Harvard, you're a star." I smiled. "Thank you, it's been a journey." Before I could say more, my mother, who happened to be walking up behind me, chimed in. "Oh, don't believe everything you read," she said, with that saccharine tone I'd come to recognize as her public mask. "Most of it's exaggerated." Mrs. Dalton's face fell. Not confused, just sad. She patted my arm softly. "Well, I believe in you, sweetheart. Always have." My mother didn't say another word. She kept walking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the small room I was renting near campus, the sounds of Boston outside like static. I kept thinking about the little moments, things I'd ignored or excused, the birthday gifts that got lost in the mail, the school awards they couldn't attend but posted about anyway, as if they had been there. The photos cropped just enough to remove me. It hadn't been accidental. These were not oversights. They were edits, curations of who got to exist in the family spotlight. I opened my journal and wrote, "I was always too much for a family that only wanted just enough." 2 days passed. Then I sent a message. I didn't craft it carefully. I didn't lead with love or cushion the truth in sugar. You had every chance to be proud of me, and every choice not to be. This isn't about Harvard, it's about humanity. I don't need a new narrative. I needed you to show up in the one that already existed. I hit send and closed the app. There was no reply that night, or the next day. Then, like always, a text from my mother. "You've made your point. We'll stay out of your way." No apology, no ownership, just retreat disguised as grace. I stared at the message and didn't feel anger. I felt confirmation. It was exactly what I had expected. That afternoon, an email landed in my inbox from the Harvard Office of Student Life. Subject line, Freshman Leadership Award nomination. I opened it, breath-catching. The body of the email congratulated me on my academic excellence and my recent viral speech. I had been nominated by multiple faculty members. I had the chance to speak at the upcoming freshman orientation. You may invite up to 2 guests for reserved front row seating, the message ended. I sat there staring at those words for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to do, because I did. I closed the laptop slowly. Then, almost without realizing it, whispered aloud, "No thank you." The day of the Leadership Awards ceremony began with a breeze that rustled the last of the fall leaves along Harvard Yard. I walked slowly through the archway, the weight of my heels familiar, steady. There was no one waiting at the gate, no one waving from a bench or calling my name with excitement, just me. Inside the auditorium, rows of white chairs were lined with program booklets and place cards. A staff member guided me toward the front. "You're one of our key nominees, right over here." 2 seats in the first row had no names. I had left them blank on purpose. When I first received the email, my finger hovered over the Invite Guests section for a full 10 minutes. I could have typed their names, could have given them a front row view of a life they'd spent years pretending not to see. I didn't. And now, those seats stood as quiet proof that absence wasn't always unintentional. Some chairs are left empty not because no one showed up, but because you stopped inviting them. The students buzzed around me, hugging parents, posing for selfies with bouquets. I nodded politely, accepting compliments, smiling at classmates. No one asked where my family was, maybe because by now they already knew. After the ceremony, My academic advisor, a woman named Dr. Lee, who always spoke with intention, found me near the refreshment table. "You're not easy to forget," she said, extending her hand. "Your words moved more people than you'll ever meet." I shook her hand, warmth blooming in my chest. "Thank you for seeing me." She tilted her head. "You made it impossible not to." Later, while I gathered my things, two students I barely knew approached me. One, a tall girl in a blue blazer, said, "Your speech gave me the courage to come out to my parents." Another added, "You reminded me I could belong here, even if no one at home thinks I do." I didn't cry. I just nodded. That afternoon, I walked home with slow steps, boots crunching over leaves that blanketed the path. And my bag hung heavy on one shoulder, but I didn't shift it. I let it pull, let it remind me what it had taken to carry this far. The walk from the auditorium to my apartment wasn't long, but I stretched it out. Breathing in the cold air, I thought about how different this fall felt from the last. Back then, I was building escape plans in secret. Now, I was building peace. Inside, my apartment smelled like lavender and old books. I kicked off my shoes, placed my bag on the entry table, and moved toward the bookshelf. I took the award plaque and placed it between two well-loved paperbacks. Not in a display case, not on a pedestal. It wasn't proof that I had won. It was proof that I had survived being unseen. I lit a candle, not for prayer, but for presence, and sat in the armchair I'd thrifted with my first tutoring paycheck. That evening, while sipping tea and folding laundry, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Saw the photos. "You look nice." "Hope you're doing well." No punctuation, no name. I stared at it. Didn't touch the screen. Let it sit there like a postcard from another life. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but because not every message needs a reply. Not every door has to stay open. Later that night, I opened my journal for the first time in weeks. "Forgiveness is letting go of the need to be understood," I wrote. Then I closed the book and turned off the light. 2 days later, I opened my mailbox and found a card tucked between flyers and coupons. No return address, no name on the envelope. Inside, in slanted handwriting I recognized instantly, were just a few words. "We watched your speech. We didn't know. We're sorry." No signature. But it didn't need one. Some apologies arrive too late to be useful, but not too late to be heard. I sat at my desk with the envelope from Dad's silent apology in front of me, the familiar scent of aged paper reminding me of years spent hoping for validation. The handwriting was unmistakably his, angular, careful. I flipped the note over and stared at the blank space. Then I picked up a pen and wrote 2 sentences with steady clarity. "Too late. You don't get to rewrite history with 1 sentence." I folded the note, slipped it into the envelope, sealed it with a finality I'd never felt toward them before. I stood, stepping into the autumn sunlight trailing through my window, and walked to the mailbox at the end of the block. My heart thudded not with dread, but calm resolve. At the very last moment, I turned, the sibling instinct to reconcile dying away, and dropped the unopened envelope into the trash bin in the hallway. Some closures don't need delivery, they just need decision. Weeks later, I sat backstage at the Harvard Women's Initiative Leadership Conference just before opening remarks. My hands trembled, not from fear, but anticipation. I was about to speak again, not for pity, but clarity. I stepped onto the stage in front of a sea of attentive faces. Their eyes were expectant. I offered no preamble. Instead, I let my story speak. I shared how I grew up unseen, not because I wasn't trying, but because my value didn't align with someone else's story. How I lost the trophy to a wedding photo, but found my voice in its place. How love came with strings that tightened until I no longer fit. "I wasn't disowned," I said, voice steady, looking out at the crowd. "I outgrew the conditions they tried to tie to love." The room rose, a standing ovation. This story belonged now to brave hearts willing to listen. It didn't belong to silence anymore. Later that evening, I checked my inbox. A message from a distant relative I barely speak to appeared. It contained a link to a local forum. I opened it with curiosity, feeling cautious. The thread was filled with outrage, neighbors quietly condemning the Tran family, how they disrespected their daughter. I hadn't posted anything, no accusation needed. People filled in the blanks. I didn't respond. I didn't deny. Just let the truth stand. Some truths don't need champions when they carry themselves. Revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's letting the truth walk into the room and do what it was always going to do. That night, I gathered the pieces of my own history. In a wooden memory box, I placed a photo of 10-year-old me, brighter eyes, hopeful smile, a scan of my Harvard acceptance letter, the sticky note Mom left. Don't let this get to your head. And a picture of me on stage holding my leadership award, unfiltered, radiant. I shut the lid, locked it, and labeled the box. This is how I found myself. Then I tucked it in my closet, not hidden, but preserved. A chest of survival and clarity. 1 year later, I found myself back in Sacramento, not for memory, but to speak at a national education panel. I stepped past the familiar lawn, the house where I grew up. No one was outside to wave. No one came to the door. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small note. I taped it to the mailbox. You taught me what silence feels like. Thank you. I used it to build something stronger. Then I turned and walked away. No tears, nothing to prove. Just final punctuation. Some letters aren't meant to start conversations. They're meant to end them.